to YouTube in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And now we're live on YouTube, but in a second I will click the intro music, and from this part on, it will be in the final released episode. It will be only from then on. So this is just to make sure that our sound and audio and everything looks good on YouTube. Once I get the thumb up, then I will click the music part. And if you didn't start recording just yet, please do this. And so that afterwards, if anything went wrong, I will just ask you for the recording.
Okay, let me bring up QuickTime first.
Thank you.
All right. Just the audio, right? That's
Just the audio.
Okay. All right.
Bill, you are already recording?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, super. Looks good. Then I am going to do the musical part, and then you will hear also the music, and this is how we're starting.
Let's do it. It's go time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode about books in Go. And I am joined today by two authors. Bill. Bill is a managing partner of Ardon Labs and based in Miami, which is 6 hours away from me in Berlin. Bill is teaching Go and speaking about Go, and recently published the book, The Ultimate Go Notebook. Hi, Bill.
Hey, hello. Thanks for having me.
And I'm also joined by Sheong from the other side, also 6 hours away from Berlin, but to the earlier into the experiencing the future before us in Singapore. And Sheong is the CEO of SP Digital, which is an energy tech company in Singapore, the organizer of GopherCon Singapore, a speaker, and the author of Go Web Programming, which was authored 5 years ago.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Natalie. Nice to meet everyone.
Thank you both for joining. I want to start with asking you, what was the first programming language that you learned, and how did you learn it?
I guess I'll start then, since I'm in the morning. We'll move we'll move with the sun here. First programming language was BASIC, because the first computer I had BASIC on it, and was kind of there. And I was just trying. I think I was doing what most people do, just trying to write games. And leveraging any documentation that was with the computer. I mean, we're talking like 80s here. There's no internet. And I think I had Byte magazine. So whatever I could steal from a magazine here and there was probably helpful. I felt pretty isolated compared to what you have available today in terms of the internet.
And communities.
And community. That's true. Yeah. So I guess I learned BASIC too as one of the earlier languages. Although I think that was just a lot of play and just mucking around with computer. Apple IIe, I think that's a very long time ago. This programming language, I think that was probably Pascal and Delphi. That was also a long time ago.
Fun. Pascal, I also, that was probably the first programming language that I learned with, except for Scheme. I had a high school thing with Scheme, and then like a short project. And then the proper language that they taught us was Pascal, which is actually the uncle of Go, right?
Yeah. No, that was my first language in university. The 1 in 200 classes were all Pascal, and then they threw us into C. In late 80s, like 87, 88, 89.
And so what was the recent programming language, that you learned, and how did you learn that one?
I guess we're talking Go because I've been coding in this language since 2013 and
Mhm.
haven't really had any desire to learn another language right now. So, uh, how did I learn Go? I was kind of forced into it because we needed to, as a company, get off of Windows. We couldn't afford to be in the space that we're in right now, consulting and where it's just too expensive in terms of licensing for your developer teams and licensing in terms of what you were selling in terms of product because the cloud was still new.
Mhm.
So every bid was basically your time and Microsoft licensing. So we were coming in twice as much as everybody else using the tech. Now with the cloud and everything, I think Microsoft has leveled the playing field, which is good, and they've given the tools away for free. Like, but when you're talking 2000, in that case 2013, it was very very expensive for someone to get into that space.
Mhm.
So I had to move to Linux, and I needed a language that I felt comfortable in that felt like C sharp. It felt like C and C sharp, and that ended up being Go. So I just kind of put my head down and started learning it. I think like everyone probably at that time, right? Reading as much code as you can, asking questions, and go nuts, and just trying to solve problems and getting it to work.
And
Yeah.
the learning part, did you do from some book or did you do it from just the documentation?
It really wasn't. I think there were two books at the time. Cabe had a book, and Matt Aminetti, I think, had just published a book.
Mhm.
And I love books. I like having the physical book in front of me. I like being able to scan it for the things I'm looking for. I definitely wasn't watching video. Even at top speed, I don't have the attention span for video.
Mhm.
I like the books, and I'm sure I was banging up against Google all day long looking for snippets of code too. So my guess is it was probably a lot of Google search, and then I may have used those two books.
Mhm.
I know I had them, but I think what happens for me is I'm not necessarily sitting down to read an entire book. I'm more like, I need to solve this problem now. So let me find some code that works. That's how I kind of operate.
So, Sheong, how about you?
Sure. Yeah, Go as well. That's my most current language. Although I think I have tried to dabble in a couple of other languages. I tried Rust actually.
Mhm.
Um, I just didn't have anything that I particularly wanted to do with Rust. So and Go was always a fall. Ended up with Go. So that's really the most recent working language that I'm still using, more or less on a day-to-day basis. So
Mhm.
anytime that I need to code up something, I'll always fall back to Go. It just seems to be the most convenient. And once you get kind of familiar with it, you know how to use it, and it's a good tool. It it can become a bit difficult to try to dig yourself out of that and get into a different language. So I think I'm at that point where I'm really comfortable with Go. I can do a lot
Mhm.
of stuff with Go. And if I try to go somewhere else, it's a steep learning curve, and I from the things that I actually wanted to do. So I have less motivation to move on compared to some of the other programming languages that I used before in the past, like Ruby and Java. Motivations for me to I wouldn't say get out, I would say try a different programming language that was more useful for those cases. And therefore,
Mhm.
I tried those. Yeah, so that was my experience in getting to go.
And how did you go about learning Go?
Ah, I guess the experience is very much the same as how Bill went through his experience, as in learning through books. I started a bit
Mhm.
later. I started in 2015, if I remember correctly. So honestly speaking, I don't remember which book. I do remember one of the books that I saw was actually Bill's book. So, or rather, he was writing a book at that point in time. I said, hey, that's maybe I should try writing a book too. So yeah, and I guess I eventually I did. I picked up a lot of things from everywhere. I spent a lot of time on the Golang.org actually. through the documentation, reading the articles, just cut and paste code from wherever I can find them, just run it, see how it runs, play around on the playground, and just do everything to see how it looks. It's the old tinkering mentality where you have a nice new toy and then you just try to tear it apart and see how that works and try to put it back together again and see how it runs, and then just keep on moving from there. Yeah, so that's how I picked up Go. That's how I pick up most programming languages, actually.
Yeah. And as people who not just learn but also pass on the knowledge, the difference between the two experiences of learning basic versus Go now, how would you compare that for you? I mean, obviously you changed a lot as a person as well. Technology changed, the world changed, the expectations of the world from you as a developer changed, everything changed. But still, what was your experience if you have to compare those two?
Comparing the experience of learning basic versus learning Go?
Learning the basic, which was basically your first language 30-ish years ago. What year we are now?
Yeah, probably.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a while ago. I don't know if I have an answer for that question. I think any language I've had to learn has been really about just trying to solve problems in the language, because you don't know what questions to ask until you have that question, right? Like, I'll say this. The Ultimate Go book that I just wrote, I wish I had that book when I started. I wish that was the first book I wrote. I feel like that book is the book that's going to help the average developer get on the right. If you're someone who wants to read, right? Because everybody learns differently. There are people who just love video. There are people who love blog posts. There are people who love books. Not one size fits all. And then I think there's also two different kind of groups of people. I'm going to paint with a broad brush, but there are those who just like the academic side of material, and then there are those who like more of the conversational side. I'm an average developer. I need to be entertained at some level. I need people to get to the point, not from an academic, but I do need the pace to be like this, which is why I have a hard time with talk. Sometimes I have a hard time with video, because I'm like, get to the point, get to the point, get to the point, get to the point, right? I don't have the patience. And so the Ultimate Go book I just wrote is all about like getting to the point, getting to the point, getting to the point as quickly as I can, while still feeding you enough of the background, right? So I wish I had that book. If I had that book back in 2013, I think that book I would have read more than just scanned, right? So I think for me, when it came to the basic learning, I think it was the same thing. I was just impatient. I want to figure out where's the information to do that, right? And I mean, that's me. And I can't do it on the academic side. I need to do it as I'm an average developer. So just talk to me, just don't.
You need this in kind of like a TikTok way, basically. Short to the point, just show the information and don't make long sections. Yeah,
short to the point, and keep the pace going where you're going to keep me engaged, because the moment I feel like we're off pace, my head's somewhere else. I don't think I'm unique like that. I think especially today with this instant gratification that we all have, it becomes even more important to just get to the point.
I'm waiting now for the Go course that will be completely on TikTok. Just short snippets, explaining things, visuals.
I'm trying to do that on YouTube right now, actually. I'm trying to take small snippets of a minute or two of some of the video and get it out there, right? Sometimes you need to go 5 minutes, which is a bummer to me. I'm like, nah, we need 5 minutes to get through this. So then I have to really make sure over 5 minutes that I'm keeping you engaged, right? It's the same thing in the classroom. It's more important when you're on video. It's this, how do I keep you engaged enough for at least 20 minutes at a time? I got to do it for an hour at a time, 40 minutes at a time, which is even harder. And so I'm trying to do some of that on YouTube too. There are people who just love video. They love going 2 times. I've learned how to slow down. I'll tell you that, because I know people want to go 2x on YouTube, and I can't be moving at 2x and then you go 2x. Like, that doesn't work either, right? So I've learned to slow down a little bit because of that.
Yeah. So are you secretly working on a TikTok course? So you smiled when I mentioned the idea. So if this is a spoiler, then I'm sorry.
Oh no. I am terrible with videos. I'm terrible with videos because I don't have very good equipment, and
Looks like a mess.
so this is a terrible video. I'm more of a book person. I'm more of a writer than a person who videos. I get distracted quite a bit when I speak, sort of ramble on and on. So my experience, I think, coming back to your earlier question on comparing, I can't really compare Basic, which I think was a kind of a play language I picked up very much earlier on when I was in school, actually. The real first epiphany I had about was actually with Java. Even though I learned C before that in school, I had an epiphany with Java enough for me to pick it up and do something real with it. And the idea behind object-oriented programming really struck me, and it sort of inspired me to really start coding. And the way that I picked up Java is very, very similar to the way I picked up Ruby after that. I picked up Go after that as well. So I think the learning journey that I had always seems to be the same, where I
Programming language, I was so obsessed with it
that
that I will start learning it. I will start coding
on it. I'll start doing everything I know about it, and then I'll start telling everybody about it, right? So I start talking to people, talking to the communities, trying to do stuff with it and showing off what I've done. Basically, just trying and doing stuff. And I don't think I've changed that much since the time that I first picked up Java and the time that I picked up Go. So I think the difference is just not there. I've always been doing this the same way.
Would you both say that you wrote the books for the purpose of teaching? Or I guess it's not just your personal notes that might as well publish that, right? It kind of reasonable assumption that when you write a book about a programming language, then you do that with the purpose of teaching it. And Bill, you teach a lot in your free or professional, both, I guess, time. You volunteer some of your time for teaching. You give professional trainings and so on. But Sheong, you don't teach so much in your everyday life. So from the two different perspectives of somebody who wrote a book about programming for the purpose of teaching, and one goes to classes and teaches, and as somebody who doesn't, how do you see teaching with a book, like, to many people like that? Is this this is something that I'm personally very obviously familiar with, because that's how you learn things. But also, when you think about this, computer is very interactive, and book is I'm sorry, Bill left the room. I'm sorry, Bill, for the question.
No. Hey, my battery was I didn't plug in the power. We're good.
Just joking, sorry. Teaching programming with a book, how do you do that?
Let me step that question back a little bit. I started with blogging, and I was blogging when I was coding in C#, and I had stuff published, but it wasn't like heads down all the time. And when I started learning Go, I said, I am so new to this language, and I'm so new to Linux. I mean, I had to learn a whole new operating system on top of a brand new language. And I was very productive in C#. I mean, I get depressed when I have to learn something new at that kind of scale, because I know the amount of work it takes to learn something. And I like to be that person that knows like 80% of everything. I'm not the 20% kind of person. I want to know 80% of a few things, not 20% of everything. So I get this initial depression when I have to learn something new. I even held back learning Kubernetes because I know how big it is. And I'm like, Bill, you ready to get into this trench? Because once you get in, you're not getting out. So when I started learning Go, I had to learn Linux, and I said, you know what? Here's an opportunity for somebody who's completely green to start kind of writing blog posts about their experience and helping others who are just coming into the same kind of new environment, because I can't be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found from the blogging was that, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, but I think for me, I can stand up in front of anyone and start to ramble a little bit, and I can monitor my pace, and I can make sure that I'm saying things and I'm moving things on. But when it comes to writing, there's no rambling. Like you literally have to stay on a really tight pace. So if you don't know what you're talking about, it comes out fairly quickly when you try to write it down. I think anybody can almost fake it when they're talking, but you can't fake it when you have to write it. And so a big part of the blogging ended up being really having to zone in on my understanding of things and finding the right language and the right words to use, to the point where I almost won't teach anything unless I write it down first, because that is incredibly hard. Writing is I think some of the hardest kind of work I do day. It's harder than programming.
And when
And
you
so
write, you mean the blogs?
Yeah, from the blogging. So the blogging's great, right? Because I could write a blog in like a month. It used to take me to maybe 3 weeks to write a blog post. Not full time, but over that time. So there's no stress, right? And you get the instant gratification over 2 or 3 weeks that it's done and it's published, and you're getting feedback and you're improving, right? Like it's a beautiful thing. When Brian and Eric came to me about the book, I just thought it was going to be cool. Whatever, I'm writing some blog posts. What's the big deal? I'm going to go from writing 2 or 3 pages to 20 pages, and it's going to be the same experience, right? No, no. I mean, that book burned me out. That was work. That wasn't fun. When I see anybody write a book, I'm just like, whatever support you need from me, you got it. Because if you finish it and you got it in your hands, that's monumental. Writing a book is just, it's a huge, and there's no other payoff other than saying I wrote the book. You're not getting rich. You're not making money on it. So if you do it, it's got to be for yourself. It really has to be for yourself and for your own self kind of learning. And if somebody else learns from that book, well, to me, that's just gravy. That's bonus. But write that book for yourself. Write those blog posts for yourself, so you can zero in on that learning, right? So, I mean, that's kind of the way I see it. And I like blogging before writing a book anyway. I like to make sure that you have this material set and you know how to talk about it, and you know how to speak about it. And the writing does that. So it's hard work.
Yeah.
Sheong, how was your impression of writing a book, of teaching with a book?
I don't really teach with my books. I don't really teach actually. Small anecdote about myself. Teacher. So he taught secondary school physics, and he told me that be a teacher, because and that was what I grew up with. I thought actually, but I like writing, and I mean, I actually grew up wanting to be a writer, not of technical books, but I wanted to be a writer in general. And but somehow or another, I ended up doing software, and I thought that software was a different way of writing, a different way of telling a story, different way of creating something out of nothing. So that took on a big time for me, and I started writing a lot of software. And after a while, I sort of swerved back into like writing itself and say, hey, I could write about technology, and I started to pitch certain like books to publishers and things like that. It took me a few years actually to finally pitch a book to a publisher, and then I wrote my first book, which was on and then the book was happy. I was quite proud of myself, and so on. Then I was surprised that the publisher came back to me for a second one. Like, and at that point, I was like, okay, do I really want to do that? The first book earned practically nothing. Like, it was relatively popular at the time, but it faded away, because most technology books do after a few years. Then I took on a second book project because I thought I could do it, but I was really burnt out after the second book, and then my favorite publisher came on board, right? O'Reilly, which rejected all my initial book proposals, and they came and they wanted me to publish a book,
on Ruby.
like
Mhm.
an R. So I took that as a challenge, and it was one of the most I had writing a book. It took me 10 months.
Wow.
It was a crazy 10 months, and I had a lot of fun in that book. And I had so much fun that when a third publisher came on board, Manning came to me and asked me whether I want to write a book on Go. Uh, I sort of jumped into it, but of course, I think writing with Manning was very different from writing with O'Reilly, which was also very different writing from Pact, which was my first publisher. And
Mhm.
that experience, I think Manning is very meticulous, clear about what they want to get as a book, as teaching
Mhm.
material, and that taught me a lot of things. So I think I had very different. But at the end of the day, I think I'm quite proud of all the books that I've written. I think the experience really taught me a lot of things. But it is a full-time job, and so during the period that I had to write a book, I actually worked on two jobs, in my day job, and then I have a night job. And you get an editor. Uh, Technically, for me at least, the projects of writing a book comes in spurts of, say, three months. Sorry, 3 weeks. I will submit a chapter, and then
Mhm.
there will be some editing. Then I have to run again another 3 weeks, and then 3 weeks and 3 weeks. So that process is actually quite exhausting. And after that,
Mm.
there's a lot of editing and stuff like that. So that became quite exhausting. So it has been 5 years since I've written the last book. There has been a couple of publishers who knocked on my door, but I sort of like didn't take any more of that. But of course, I had a new job at a point in time, and a lot of exciting things happening in my job, so I didn't really have the opportunity. But I don't know, maybe that's something that I can do again. But coming back to your original question, which is like teaching using writing, I don't do that because I don't really.
Mhm.
And I know you say that as a joke earlier on, right? But it is actually true for me. I write for myself, exactly like what Bill was saying. I write for
Mhm.
myself because it's really about me putting the thoughts that I had in my mind down to on paper. I started also writing blogs, posts, and afterwards moved on to books. And the books actually become a way for me to even reference what I knew at that point in time, because as I picked up new things, I learned new things, uh, and as you do more, you get the things that you learned before, right? So for
Yeah.
me, writing books and writing blog posts and articles is a way of documenting what I've learned as well. So I'm literally writing for my future self. So at I go back and I read what I've written and say, oh, okay, now I remember where I was, and those things that I've learned before, I can take it out again and do more stuff with it. So that's a little bit about how I do that.
Sounds like when you're writing documentation, then it must be also nice to your future self. If you have that person in mind, then you go back to your own code and you understand it. So kudos.
Precisely,
It's not
precisely.
obvious.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's self-documentation. You can say that.
Bill, your publication of the recent book was a slightly less traditional way. Yeah. How long did it take you to write it, and how did the publication go?
So after I finished Go in Action in 2015, I had PTSD. I couldn't write. If you go look on my blog, I've written over 100 blog posts since I started. If you go look at my blog, there's almost a year gap
Mhm.
of me blogging because that book completely traumatized me. The process of having to, I would go to a bar every night, not drink liquor, but when I walked in, they had my coffee. I had a space where there was power. And I basically spent 6 months just to get the book done. It took about 18 months. I had to every night after work go to this bar and sit down and knock out 3 or 4 hours. And I was traumatized. I couldn't write again. And then I started writing again about a year later, the blog posts, and it
Mhm.
was a struggle. Like the anxiety levels I would get trying to sit down and write they were tremendous. But I fought through the anxiety. And I started to be able to publish again blog posts. And I said, I'll never write a book again because this was too much. I'll never do it again. I'd rather stay in the blogging medium. It's enough for me. And then Hoan, about a year ago, published. He had taken my class and he had written all of these notes, and the notes were pretty good. And he had a whole repo of code too. Like a lot of it was the same from the Go training, but he had kind of made some of it his own. And he had this manuscript that he had written, and he was selling it, and people were buying it. And so quietly, I kind of just downloaded it, and I looked at it. I said, this isn't bad. This is a good kind of starting point. This is the book that I want to write.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have it in me to write it again because I'm still traumatized. At the same time, and this is interesting, right? I have people coming to me saying, hey, he's selling your material. Hey, he's selling your material, right? And at some level, maybe, but all of my material is open source. Everything I do, right? It's like, take it, make it your own, do what you want, which people think are crazy because now people are going to compete against you. Compete against me. If you're better than me, then you deserve, go for it. So none of that was bothering me at all. But I reached out to him and I said, look, you got a good skeleton here. I think we can really narrow in the focus of what you've got here and put it more into the language that I speak in the class. So if it wasn't for him doing that work, this book wouldn't exist, because though I've wanted to write this book, I just couldn't get myself to the point of starting it. And even over the 10 months that it took me to basically take what he had and rework it to what we have now and add to it, anxiety levels were off the chain. Like I could work for a week and then I couldn't work for 2 or 3 on it. And then I go back and work for a week and then I couldn't work on it. I think it wasn't until I got about 60% done that I started to see the end of the tunnel, and I focused heavy on it. And even now, I don't know how I got it done. I'm glad I got it done, but I did. Now, I decided 2 things with this particular book. It was really all the material in written form that I speak during the class. So I wanted this to be the notebook, right? Like these were the notes that everybody had been asking me for like the last 5 years for the class. So there it is. So I did a couple things differently here. The whole book is written in I, as if it's me writing notes to myself. So you read that book, other than some blog posts I added to the end, it's all I. I really wanted that kind of feel for it. The other thing on the self-publishing side was primarily because I wanted to sell this book cheap, not to lessen the value of the book, to make it accessible to everybody. And I wanted control over that. So if I went with Manning or O'Reilly or whatever, 2 things would have happened. The book wouldn't be $10 online and $25 on Amazon. It would have been, twice as much. And I would have lost that I feel. They wouldn't have gone with that kind of flow. They have their
styling
book
guides,
size, their styling guides, how they're going to do. Their editors are on top of you there. And I don't want any of that, right? So we decided to self-publish. I spent more time trying to figure out how to have a copy of this book that could be online and in print where I could manage it. And if you see if you get the books, I also wanted the book to feel like a notebook, right? Not the traditional size with the smaller font, maybe because I'm getting old. This is the geriatric Go book here, okay? So you get this book, it's big, it feels like a school notebook, the fonts are large. I don't know, I think it's kind of interesting, right? To just have something different too.
like real notes, like you would have after a class in university or
You
a class
can do
in training.
that, right? You can have it all there. And it's literally, if you take the class and you open up that book, you're like, I can hear Bill's voice, right? Like that, and that's kind of what I wanted there. But that was 10 months of struggle. And now with that book done, I'm looking to do it again with the Ultimate Service class that I've been perfecting for the last 3 years, trying to figure out how I write that down. But and trust me, when I even say I'm going to write Ultimate Service, the anxiety levels are coming up again. Because
that person who took the notes for the class of services, please contact Bill to get this book rolling. Thank you.
Yeah, that if it wasn't for that, this book would not have gotten done. So and I share everything is shared, right? Like 50-50 with him, because if he hadn't done that, this book wouldn't have existed. So, I mean, I'm really grateful that he did that work where it was necessary. But don't get me wrong. I have PTSD when it comes to these larger problems. I can blog now. That's fine. I can get in front of the camera because I know that's 4 hours and I can get that done. Like even when I'm filming right now, I've been filming for the last 2 weeks. I film for 2 or 3 hours a day. That's it. Because if I'm going to do more than that, my anxiety levels go up. It's just, I don't know what it is. It's just, it's tough. This stuff is not easy. So anybody who's doing training, anybody who's writing, anybody who's producing video, you got 110% of my support. Even if I'm not 100% in alignment with what you're teaching, or I agree, it doesn't matter to me. The fact that you're there, putting this time in and doing it, I know what that takes. You got 100% of my support. Get it out there. It's amazing.
Absolutely. It's also worth mentioning to anybody who gets any content online, written, or anything else. If you have something not nice to say, think nicely how to phrase that. If it's any useful, constructive feedback at all, or maybe keep the thoughts to yourself and do reach out and say thank you. It is even when you get earning from that, as you mentioned, you don't get rich from that, and that's so much effort. So thank you on behalf of everyone who consume the content that you create.
And it's okay that not everybody, like, it would be boring if everybody agreed with and I say that in my classes. I go, you don't have to agree with everything I'm saying. You got your own experiences, you got your own thoughts on the matter. It doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong, because you're not, like, let's stop that. Like, you don't have to agree with me. I don't have to agree with you. It doesn't mean I don't appreciate what you're publishing. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to help somebody that I can't. This is the other thing. Not everybody is in tune with my writing, with my videos, with my classes, with how I approach things. You need a dozen or so teachers. You need people writing, because it's the only way we're going to be able to resonate with the entire community. But let's not pretend that there's one writer, one style, one way of thinking about things that fits all. It doesn't. I meet people all the time that just don't like the way I teach or don't agree with. That's fair. Like, but you're right. That doesn't give you an opportunity to be mean. It doesn't give you an opportunity to squash it. It's for you to say, okay, this is not somebody I want to learn from, because I don't feel like I'm in tune with this particular person. There is somebody out there that you will be in tune with. Find that person. And then from there, I always tell other people in the class, this is a two-way road, right? Like, you're a student, but you're also a teacher, because you're going to have to teach this stuff to somebody else at some point if you're working on a team and these things come up. So you don't like the way I'm teaching it? Well, how would you teach it? Think about it. How would you explain this to the next person? Improve on that. And I think there aren't enough people doing that. Like, you learned something, how would you teach it? Improve it. I'd love to hear how you teach it. I'd love to hear what words you use. I'd love to hear. I mean, that's good. I may not use it, but I'd love to hear it.
Those are two very interesting tips for people who learn. One is find lots of different content to learn from, and two, think how will you go about teaching that. What other tips would you have for people who learn maybe something specifically, like learning from a book, like use sticky notes, or what would be tips that you can share? Maybe specific to your books, maybe general.
For me, if you're brand new on a subject and you're trying to get a foundation, I think that's where books come in. I think books should be one of two things. Either they're going to be the ultimate reference, where you got a strong index and I'm looking how to use something and boom, I can find it. Or they have to provide a strong, balanced foundation, where you read the book. Hopefully that took you 6 months in. Now you're looking for the blog posts. Now you're looking for the small video snippets. Now you're looking for, here's the other thing. I think the community has enough general go books right now. I'm just going to say it. Like, we don't, if you're thinking about writing a book right now, I'm almost going to beg you to not write another general go book, right? We've got enough of them. This is why the notebook is trying to be a little different. What we need, and I tell publishers this all the time, we need books on the standard library. How amazing would it be to have somebody write 50 to 80 page tops, right? Books on all the core standard library packages out there. Give me an amazing book with a lot of code examples on IO, OS. Name the package, JSON. Like we all use about a dozen packages, right? These are the books that are missing. We want to build a strong content for the Go community. I think we need these really narrow focused books now, like standard library stuff or very specific things that give people enough of a foundation where they can now go and take it on their own. This is what I like. If you're writing another just traditional Go book from beginning to end, I think personally, I think you're wasting your time because we have almost a dozen books like that now today. We need that next level content that sits on top.
So Sheong, what do you think?
About whether we have enough Go books.
About everything, yeah. What tips do you have to learn from a book specifically? What books would you want to see? What books would you want to write? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm ambivalent about whether it's books or blogs, because I read everything, right? So for me, it doesn't really differ. And anyway, I read books, not from a physical book. I normally read ebooks.
Wait, even
ebooks
programming books you read as ebooks?
Ebooks, yeah, I read
Wow,
everything.
I tried that. Kudos to you. I found it not easy for me.
Yeah, because I take the public transport quite often, and lugging a thick programming book in my bag, taking it out and flipping, reading on, it doesn't work. So I've been doing it for a long time. I use my iPad. I will just read everything from there, right? So in a sense, like a blog post, a book, they all after a while they all mash into one for me, and then all this information come to one place. So for me, that it doesn't really differ a lot. I think I sort of agree with what Bill said, that there are a lot of general Go knowledge already that's already available, and specific knowledge about the packages are really important. And I mean, this is so coincidental because I just started it's not, anyway, I'm not like trying to publicize or anything like that, right? But I just started this publication where I'm trying to write really articles, even snippets, like to actually talk about certain specific things that you do, and it's usually
and we
around
will include a link to those in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you. It's really around the standard library and things like the recent one I wrote is about how do you actually use 2D, how do you use Go for 2D image manipulation, right? How do you use the image package, which I use quite often. The problem is that every time I start a project, I use it and so on, and then I do some other stuff. I can say, okay, now I want to use image. It's like, okay, I can't remember how I do it, so I need to look at my old code and start to relearn the thing. I need to write it down somewhere. It's sort of like Sheong's notes, and then so why don't I just publish it as a small little snippets, and I can refer to it whenever I need to, and maybe somebody else can also pick it up and learn from there. So I'm not really trying to deliberately teach anyone. That I'm really like talking to my future self so that I can pick it up at a later point in time. And so if you're asking me tips to say how to learn, I think for me one of the best ways to learn is really trying to explain what you have learned to somebody else. And if the other person can actually understand what you are saying, and you can actually understand what you are trying to explain, then you probably have learned the thing well enough, right? So so when I write the blog post or even the book, I take time to really go a lot deeper into those topics, and then I try to explain it. And when I explain it and I read it again and say, look, that doesn't make sense at all, what I'm writing. Probably I don't really understand what I'm saying. Then I try to do more stuff, and that process enables me to learn more. And finally, be able to condense it in a version or in a way that people can actually understand, read and understand. I can read it. Let's say I leave it alone for 3 weeks and come back and I read it again and say, oh, I understand what I was trying to say. Then you would have achieved that level of understanding of the topic that you are trying to pick up. So yeah, so it goes round for what I'm trying to do. I really do not have an ideal like audience, say this is the reader I'm trying to target, right? I know the publisher sometimes tells me, look, imagine who your reader is, what is the thing, but actually I'm just writing for myself. So I'm like, and I would tell the publisher, okay, this is the ideal reader, like, okay, this is me actually, and I just pretend that I'm the ideal reader, and I propose it to the publisher, and so far that sort of works for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. You both mentioned that you agree on that there's a lot of general Go content out there, and we should write books as a community. We should write books about specific things like the standard library. I want to take this one step back and ask about the idea of teaching programming with books. So I guess I studied in university computers. We had lots of different books, so it's kind of usual for me. But friends of mine who went to boot camps to learn programming because their original profession is something unrelated, it's less common to learn. For example, in the boot camps that I know of with books, you learn more with interactive content, a little bit in-person class or Zoom calls, and a little bit just programming exercises with the computer. And this is in some ways similar to how your job is going to be, in the sense that you will sit in front of a computer and will be writing code. And it's interesting, the idea of teaching something as interactive as programming with a book. Do you think this is something that will stay as we move to more content online in the variations of recordings or live trainings and TikToks maybe?
It's all about code. I think I've got over 400 code examples in the Ultimate Go. It's all about code. Even if you're going to give a talk at a programming language conference, you got to be showing code. It's all about code, right? So if you look at the Ultimate Go book, the way I literally wrote it is I spent almost 8 years writing all that code, right? And I tell people who are blogging, I tell people who are giving talks, I say, let's develop the outline so we know what the path is. And then before you write a single word, whether this is a talk for a slide deck or a blog post, all the code has to be written and reviewed. Let's validate that we have every example that we want to share. And then we'll figure out, once we have all the examples, how do we break that down? Sometimes you want to show it in parts where it's being adapted, refactored. There are other times where we could just show the code and explain it so people can then copy and paste that code out. Here's the other thing about code. People will copy and paste code blindly. So you have to make sure that every example is production ready, right? You could say, well, I'm going to add a comment telling people not to do this. Yeah, they don't read. So
they will copy with a comment.
Yes. And so unless the book is an anti-pattern book, which still scares me a little bit because you're putting code examples out there that you don't want people to use, don't add any example to the books or blog posts that you don't want somebody to copy, because they're going to copy it. And that makes it hard. So I want to really focus on all the code examples first and get that solid. And then you can start writing about that code. Like for me, you should be writing about that code. And so without that code, you don't have it. So like in Ultimate Go, there's like, I think 400 something code examples in there that I talk to. So I think a book that understands that a programmer needs to see code and needs to understand code can work if that book is, if the book really focuses on that. If the book is about theory, that's one thing, that's fine, that's fair. But you're going into those coding camps to learn how to write code. So you need code to look at, you need code to reference, you need code to understand. And I think that's where that focus has to be. So here's the other thing as well, right? Like If you've been in my classes, you hear me talk about there's a micro level of understanding and a macro level of understanding. And the micro level is down to every line of code, right? That's ultimate Go. I'm going to break down so you have readability and comprehension down to a line of code. That's the micro level. And that's a foundational level. You need that. And then the macro level is the service class, which is we're going to talk about project structures and modules and how we layer code. And then all the macro level architectural engineering decisions that go in between writing code. There's a big lack of the macro right now, I think, in the community, right? Like there is no idiom on project structures. There is no, and I don't think there ever will be, but I'd like to see more solid examples. Service tries to provide one example of this is how I layer my projects. And it's not what I'm doing, it's the why. We need more macro level engineering content that talks about why somebody's doing it. That way I can still disagree with you, but at least I know where your head is coming from, why you did this. Why did I do this? Why did I do this? Good, you know what? I'm gonna do it like this because this is why. And that's fair. And I wanna get away from frameworks and into starter kits for everything. Give me a piece of code, even if it's fairly large. Explain to me why the engineering is what it is, and then let me take it. But it all goes back down to code, right? Your boot camps should be doing the same thing. Here's some code that we're using. This is why it's being written like this. Now you can take it on your own. So when I think about the ultimate service book, I've been struggling a little bit because this is higher level, macro level sort of concepts. How do I take something, break it down, refactor it, and continue to explain the why over and over and over and over and over again in a book that runs at a good pace and is entertaining? I mean, it's taken me 3 years to be able to do it in front of the camera, to be honest with you. It's taken me 3 years to get this class to a point where I feel comfortable talking about it at the right pace, at the moments of refactoring. There's been a lot of practice there. Writing, it's going to take it to a whole nother level. I can tell you this. I can tell you something and it makes sense. I try to write it down and suddenly I'm like, there's holes here. There's a hole here, there's a hole there, there's a hole here. I'm not really explaining this. Oh my God, that person was probably lost here, right? Because I've got bias in my head. I've got things in my head that when you're reading it on paper, it kind of starts to show what's missing. So, but to me, it's code, 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 code. And you have to start with your outline, and then you got to start with every code example that you want to present. And make sure it's idiomatic and make sure that it's formatted right, please. And get the community or people to review that code. Because once you got the code and you know it's solid and everybody kind of agrees and that's how we should write that piece of code, and that's a good teaching piece of code, the rest will just fall into place.
Yeah.
My approach for writing books is slightly different. I think, I mean, the code is actually pretty important, of course, right? This programming book or programming blog, you need code. But I think for books in particular, if everything is code, then it probably shouldn't be in a book. You know, it should be in a blog post or it should be an online book or whatever, because or it should be a repository, right? We just go through a repository. Books, I think, has a slightly different function, which I mean, this is what the theory that I subscribe to. It's supposed to tell a story, like it's supposed to tell more than just the code. It's supposed to bring the reason behind the code. It's like if you're trying to, I mean, obviously there's some very technical books, but generally I try to write something a little bit beyond that. Is like the reason for the code. So I always start with the reason for the software. And if I'm trying to explain certain things, I will always try to explain it from a history perspective. So like, where does this come from? Why is it this way? You know, so people has a perspective of why it became this way. Like when I was writing the Go Web programming book, I started with a chapter that explains, like, you know, HTTP, the internet, and stuff like that. How we came about having something called web programming in the first place. And therefore, when you get into the actual code, you understand why the certain things are that way. That because from the historical perspective, it sort of evolved from where it came from to where it is today. and certain ways of doing things are because of certain protocols, certain history, and so on and so forth. So that for me, I think is the function of the book to explain.
Code alone then is
Basic
basically
repository, which you can actually go in say a GitHub repository and you can read the code. So obviously you need to have a lot more documentation to explain and everything. Context of it, like the story behind the code, is why I write the book or why I write the post. The story, the history, the whole context of why that software exists. Why did I do it this way? It's like if I write a piece of software and it achieves a target, a rationale. It's like, couldn't I have done this in a different way? Couldn't I have used a different programming language, a different technology? Because there are so many of them, right? Why don't I do it that way? So at the end of the day, it will not always be technical reason why you want to do it. Oh, I think this is the best way of writing it. That's the case. Sometimes, in fact, I think much more times than we think it would be because it is something that I know, that I'm familiar with, that I'm comfortable with, and therefore I just like right now, a lot of the stuff that I write based on Go, it's not because I think Go is the greatest be all and end all, right? It's because I'm really comfortable with it, and I'm the one writing it, right? So I would write it in Go, right? But somebody else would write it completely different way of doing it. But obviously, I need to rationalize why I do it because I'm a rational person, so I need to my reasons why I do it this way. So there, I try to explain the reasoning software and how I get to actually write it that way. So that's how I would put it.
And the code examples that you both include in the books, do you think it makes more sense to have many different small examples of code, or have like one example story and kind of develop that by showing every time working on a different part of it, but actually still one main plot of code?
I think when you're writing that book or you're on stage and you're giving that talk, whether, from my perspective, you have to change your mindset for a second and become the authority. Like they try to tell people is, I've got imposter syndrome and I doubt myself as much as anybody else. But the moment I'm in front of that camera, I can't be that way. I have to stand there and say, I'm an authority on what my beliefs and opinions are. You don't have to agree with me, but I'm going to be fairly strong in what I'm going to teach you, right? I think that's important. So if I'm writing a book or a blog post about a particular piece of code, I don't want to be wishy-washy and say, you do it this way, you can do that. I'm going to show you how I am going to do it and why I'm going to do it that way for me, right? And I think there's a lot of people who appreciate that because there's a lot of average developers out there. I'm one of them, who are busy day in and day out trying to get things done. And a lot of people just need to be told what to do and feel confident that if they do this, they're at least on the right path, right? Until they learn more. And so for me, I don't want the wishy-washy. I want, what is your opinion? I want you to be confident in your opinion. I want you to share that with me. I can make an assessment of whether or not I agree with you or not. And if I don't, it's okay. But I'd much prefer you to just really spend that 20 minutes or whatever it is, trying to convince me that what you're doing is what I should be doing. I like that kind of content. Even if I don't agree with you, just the passion that you have this belief and you're teaching it. I want that on my dev teams. I mean, I work on projects, right? I'm working with 2 engineers right now on something, and we are almost every day having engineering conversations. And I try to gauge how strong the rest of the team feels compared to how strong I feel about something. And if I don't feel that strong and Ed feels stronger, I'll back off sometimes and say, let's see how this plays out. I mean, nothing's written in stone anyway, right? But let's see how it plays out. And I kind of want that from my content. I want that person to be confident that, and it doesn't mean you can't change your mind. Trust me, a year from now, my beliefs in something could change because someone's convinced me otherwise, or I've learned otherwise. And let's be clear about that, right? I mean, I've got blog posts back from 2013. I am a completely different person from back then. So some of the things I was teaching and why I was teaching it back then, I also don't necessarily believe 100% anymore. I'm not going to take the content down. It would be a tremendous amount of work to try to refactor that. I'm just not going to do it. But I think sometimes I see on Twitter that people are like, well, you didn't say that last week, or you didn't say that a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we're not only should our code get refactored over time, I think it's okay for us to refactor over time.
Definitely. Definitely, yeah. And what do you, with the upcoming of AI generating code for us, do you think it will make writing books easier, given that the starting point is code? Then you'll have basically machine wrote you some code. Maybe you can ask some the other machine to write the story for that code, and well, why don't I make a book out of that?
That's not new. Back in the 90s, I remember working at some shop where they wanted to bring UML tooling in. We were going to storyboard the entire project in UML, and the whole thing was going to be code generated, and we weren't going to have to write a single line of code again. I don't know how many people have heard of UML, right? I am not a person who is a fan of code generation. I feel like I'd rather be writing code than anything else. I'm also not a fan of data-driven development, in a sense that instead of writing the code, you write all of this data, and then the data kind of drives the code to the point where the code is so generic that if there's a bug, you're scratching your head about where to look. For me, I'm always about being able to maintain, manage, and debugging a code base. So code gen historically for me has not worked out. So I don't think I'm the best person there, because I don't think I would go down that path of. And I know there's like, you're doing gRPC and you're going to generate your clients and your stubs, and I get all that. That's fine. That's fair. But I mean, beyond that, I'm just not a fan. I just stay away from it. So maybe I'm probably not the best person for this question.
Yeah. I went through the same things with code generation as well, very much earlier in my career, where there was this 4GL code base with huge project that was involved in, I think, 200 over developers, 3 countries, Singapore, Malaysia, and where was the other place? India. So we had programmers in 3 different countries working on a huge project. It was a failed project, actually. So they used 4GL. That really didn't work out too well. Then that was before the UML craze sort of turned up, and that didn't work too well either. So for me, didn't really work too well. I think there's a lot more of that nowadays. They call it different names, though. I think they call it no-code movement or something like that. I'm a bit of a skeptic on this. But I think if you're talking about machine learning, it's a completely different thing that you're talking about. It's not really generating code. Actually, you're basically generating a model, right? And it becomes a black box because it's too complicated for you to try to unravel it. And basically, and then it's going to churn out probabilities. So the paradigm actually changes completely from what you would, which is very deterministic, because at the end of the day, it's very deterministic. You can actually do tests, and your software can consistently come out the same results, and that's why you test it, because you want the consistent results. But once you started to putting in machine learning, the results are not going to be consistent, because you show different data, then it will come out with different results, and that's to be expected, right? The probability and everything. So I think if we are talking about that, then so obviously that is not going to be the same thing, because when you're starting to write about that in a book, in a blog post, if you're writing about that, then you're really not writing about the model. You're really writing about the algorithm and how the algorithm works and so on. Again, I will always fall back on, say, the history of how all the models come about, what's the thinking behind it, what's your rationale you would want to build the algorithm that creates the model this way, and so on and so forth. So that, I think, would be the way. But I'm actually not data scientist. I'm not an AI engineer enough to screw things up, but I think I would not be able to do that in production. A lot more to talk about that, but I think the approach that I would have for writing anything about this kind of thing would be the similar. It's really about explaining, right? So for me, writing is about clearly explaining certain things, how it works, why it works, and how to use it. Um, so the cases would be the same up whichever technology that you bring up. I'm actually a big fan of science books. I grew up reading a lot of science, popular science. I read a lot of stories about how things are made, how they work. I'm a big fan of that, and that is the kind of tradition I come with when I write. I always wanted to explain things on how it works. So whether is it about programming, or is it about software, is it about any kinds of technology, that's how I would write it.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, if we're talking about machine learning and running data models, that to me is API work, right? Like, I don't want to write that code. I just want to hit an endpoint. But if we're talking about AI generating Go code for me, that's where I've had problems.
Did you try GitHub's Copilot?
With the VS Code window coming up? Or
Yeah,
I did. I thought it was pretty wild. I guess VS Code has been setting themselves up for that. So yeah, it was pretty amazing to be able to just jump into an editor there and start looking at code. Yeah, I think that was a fantastic idea. And the integration looks pretty good too. So
yeah. So this is an example of a code generator, right? It comes in the form of a VS Code plugin. It's created by GitHub based on the OpenAI codex engine, but it's actually an AI-driven code generator. So would one of those be creating content for us at some point?
I don't know. I think that maybe if it's going to be academic and cold and dry documentation, maybe. I don't know. I think there has to be a personality. When you're writing a book with several people, if it's not just yourself, one of the biggest challenges you have, and the challenges that the editor has, is trying to create a single voice in everything that's being written. And the idea is that eventually everybody writes in the same voice because you've been doing it enough and the editor's been kind of pushing you in that sense. But I don't know. I think voice is important. So I guess if we can create that Turing machine, right, where we don't know who we're talking to, maybe it works.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I don't quite agree with code generation, actually. I never really did, because I thought, why would you want to generate code? What's the point in generating code? Because code is the means to the end, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to have software. If you are able to generate the software right away, then why do you want to create that intermediary? Why do you want to generate code? Code is that human beings write in order to generate the software. But if the machine is able to generate the software at the end of the day, then why do you want to use the machine to create an intermediary instead? So that's really puzzling for me. It's probably a tool to help programmers, but I don't think that's really the end goal. So for me, I would say just get to the end of the story, which is really creating the models, right? The machine learning models to do the stuff rather than do something in between. So
you can write the code that generates the code, or you can write the code you need. I guess.
Or use the code that somebody else wrote to generate the code that you need.
But there's no code, right? Because if you are doing machine learning at a certain point, you are basically just training the model. You are not really writing code anymore. So that again, for me, is a slightly different paradigm. But I mean, I don't quite agree with using machine learning to generate code, because I think it's a redundant process. I think it's a something that's not necessary. Why don't you just get to the end of the game, which is creating the software? Because that's what we are all trying to do, right? We are all at the end of the day trying to create software to do certain things for us. And programming is a means of an end. I mean, it is that thing, that we do, that we love to do, and there's a lot of art in it. That's the things that we enjoy doing. But it is a process to get to the end, which is generating the software. If you have the tools to be able to generate the software, then why don't you just get to the end of it instead of trying to muck around with it somewhere? And
Could be satisfying for programmers because
you know,
that's not something generating.
that's weird for me. That's like I don't really know how to best explain it, but I thought maybe the best way to do is just to generate the end story. But I don't think you will ever replace the programmer, because you always need somebody to try to build the software, create the software, and software is created to serve certain purposes. And the person who is able to describe what purpose it is, that's the programmer who's able to do it. Whether then you code it up in programming language like Go, or you give enough instructions for the software or another piece of software to generate the end result. This is just a different tool.
Yeah.
So I think that the programmer will not go away,
Yeah.
but the
language will change.
Yeah, the language is like, why do you want to get the machine language tools to generate something for you, so that now you can go and compile it and generate the software?
Yeah.
That's silly.
Now, let's be fair for a second. I want to be fair because I feel like sometimes, I've been doing this for 30 years, so there's some baggage and bias. I think we both tried to do code generation at an early age. In an early part of my career, I tried it. It didn't work. So I'm here saying to you, I failed, right? Now, there may be somebody 20, 30 years younger than me going, I know, Bill, but I can do it better. I don't want to discourage anybody from trying anything if they think that we're now at a point where it can work. Go for it. Learn, succeed or fail on your own terms. But it will be interesting when you're 50, did you get to the same conclusion we did, where just code generation overall hasn't worked for us? And me, it's really fallen down when I've had to maintain and debug the software more than the actual generation of code, right? My whole focus is my ability to maintain and debug and manage a piece of code. So that's where it's broken down. But maybe you've got the magic bean that I don't know, the pixie dust that I don't have, and you can pull it off. So I don't want to discourage it. I just want to be fair that, at least for me, I'm saying this because I tried. It didn't work for me, right? So either you take that and say, good, I'm not going to spend my time on that, or Bill, come on, you didn't know what you were doing, and I'm going to try as well. Go for it. Right? You might just, I just want to be fair there.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I've been asking that out of personal curiosity. I've been playing with actually not something that generates code, but explains code. So I will add the links to that to anybody who was curious about this. It's called Stenography Dev. I will add that also in the end of the show notes. And speaking of end, we have reached the end of the show, which means we are on time for our unpopular opinion. So I will play the tune for that while you get ready to share whatever your unpopular opinion is.
Unpopular opinion. I actually think you should probably leave. Unpopular opinion.
So our unpopular opinion can be anything related to Go, code, tech, or neither. We don't need to hear that twice. That is probably a popular opinion. That once is enough. Would any of you want to go first with your unpopular opinion?
So I've been, just to keep myself educated, trying to form some internal opinions about NFTs and ownership over digital, let's just say digital art right now, just to kind of zero it in on, right? And I just, again, I think I'm old and I've got too much baggage or bias, but I just don't feel like an NFT gives me the same sort of ownership as if I owned the physical painting that the artist physically painted on, and I had that. Like, unless I had, and maybe the code files that artist used, like the Adobe files or something, where I said I have it, but they could still give that to somebody else. The artist can't give that canvas to somebody else unless they painted it twice.
What if it's digital art?
That's what I'm saying. I love the idea of an NFT for digital artists. Like, don't get me wrong. It's interesting, right? If you're a digital artist, how can you sell your stuff, right? I get it. I just don't. Here's the scenario. I walk into your house and I see a painting on physical canvas, and I can ask you, is that the original? And you could say yes, and I'd be like, wow, the artist actually physically touched that, right? Or you could say no, and I could say, that's cool. It's a cool piece of art. But if you had like a digital frame on the wall, right, where you could put any pixels you want up there, and it was some art, I wouldn't be asking you, do you own this? I might say, do you have an NFT for that? But like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm really struggling with this concept of this pure ownership and people spending hundreds of thousands of dollars for the digital art, with some sense that they have this real physical ownership of it. I don't think like Ethereum is going away anytime soon. I don't know about all the other platforms that are out there, right? Because it's scary. Overnight, your NFT doesn't exist anymore. Like what the painting does, unless you have a fire, obviously. But you understand what I'm saying? So I am struggling with this idea that an NFT gives you real ownership over some digital artifact. I don't know. I'm trying, but I'm struggling.
I have to ask, how do you feel about before the era of NFT, like a decade ago, about art that is photography? Like, I'm a photographer, I'm selling my photographs as an art. How do you feel about that?
If the artist is handing me that print, then I feel the same way. Like, and I have them maybe sign the back of it. Now I have real ownership because the artist had a physical interaction with it. If they're just sending me a digital copy of it, I have one of God knows how many, right? It's not the same. It's this idea of so this is why I want the code. So if you did this painting and you gave me the code files for the tooling that you use, let's just see Adobe again. Well, I know you wrote that code. Now I feel like I connected with you in some way because I'm like, look, this is the code that they wrote. Like they literally did this. Nobody else did this. Now maybe there's some ownership there for me.
So basically being part of the creation process is what you look for in art.
Having that physical connection with the person that produced it, for me, means ownership. It means, so when I give somebody, if I get a book from someone and they signed it, like I know they touched that book, I know they interacted with that physical book. It's something special about that book beyond me just buying it on Amazon, right? And so that's what I'm looking for. If there was a way of, with the NFT, having ownership of the code and knowing this is the code they used, I think that would help me. I think, but it would be the same thing with the photographer.
Yeah.
I want to know that you physically touched it, and maybe you signed it, and maybe there's a way of doing a digital signature with that would be interesting now that we're talking about it. Is there a way to stamp a digital signature that only that artist could have put on that image, right? Now it gets interesting to me because anybody can download and reproduce it, but not anybody can have that digital signature unless it came from the artist. So now maybe that thing's worth $20,000 for me. I'm not saying the art isn't worth $20,000. I mean, there's some amazing creations that are happening. Like, that's not the problem. The problem for me is, how do I get that physical connection? How do I know that the artist was literally involved in giving me that electronic asset? That's what I need. So I just don't think the NFT is enough. That's my unpopular opinion.
That's fair. That's a very up-to-date one, I have to say. So Sheong, how about you?
I have a pretty mundane, I'm not sure whether you can call it unpopular opinion. I think that there is a tendency for people, when you have a hobby and you like doing stuff, and people come to you and start talking about, hey, you know what, you could convert this into a business,
Mm.
right? It can be a new side hustle and stuff like that. I'm actually not very. I mean, I'm annoyed at it. I mean, the one of the reasons why I'm annoyed is I I mean, for the past year or so, I picked up a new hobby. I picked up baking, so I like baking. Um, and I don't mean the sourdough type, right? I have a lot of friends who get in sourdough. I don't like sourdough. Okay, maybe that's the unpopular opinion. I don't really like. I like eating sourdough. I don't like making sourdough because I don't like certain things about it, which I'll not get into. I bake a lot of other different things, like I bake tarts, I bake cakes, and stuff like that. And a lot of people come to me and say, hey, that you should be opening up a bakery. You should
Mhm.
be. No, that's not what I want to do. I
So you
just
want
want
to
to
live
bake.
your side hustle as a hobby. You don't want it to be a side hustle at
It is
all.
my hobby. Yeah, it is my hobby, and that's
And
what I
better
do.
not include sourdough anyway.
It will not include sourdough. I mean, people keep trying to give me the starters, right? Sourdough starters. And no, I don't want disgusting. I don't really like it. I I like to do the stuff, and it's the same thing with some of the stuff that I do that are the code that I write as well. It's not really a side hustle because I sometimes I go into projects that I do because I like programming. And some of the things that I write is like, yeah, because I like writing. Books don't really earn me much. In fact, they hardly earn me anything, right? So but I like doing it because I enjoy doing it. So I don't want to turn that into a side hustle. Because I have a day job, and
Yeah.
I'm earning enough for my day job to feed me and my family, and that's good enough for me. But my day job is not my entire life. I like to do some other things which are hobby. I don't need to turn those things into money making ventures. So I I just get a little bit annoyed when some people. I mean, they are all very good natured, right? They're all trying to say, hey, there's other good stuff you could do, da da da. But yeah, it sort of annoys me. It annoys me even more because I can only smile and say, hey, thanks. But that's sort of like I guess that's my opinion.
Oh, that's interesting. Those are two good, solid, unpopular opinions, and we'll definitely run those as surveys, and then we'll see if your unpopular opinion is popular or unpopular. But yeah, we'll see where that develops. Yeah, I guess this would be concluding the episode for today. Thank you very much for joining in your different hours of the day. We mentioned this before we started recording, but actually, Bill is based in Miami. I'm based in Berlin, and Sheong is based in Singapore, and we're 6 hours away from each other. So Bill is 6 hours into the future, and Sheong, relative to me, 6 hours already experienced this day, and then 12 hours away from each other. It's crazy. It's almost midnight for you, Sheong, right?
Yeah, it's 11:30. About 30 minutes to midnight.
Yeah, and Bill, it's almost noon lunchtime for you.
Yeah.
Thank you both again so much for your time of the day. It was very interesting, and thank you for all the cool books that you wrote and all the content that you're making for the community. We will be publishing this episode with all the notes, so you can find there all the books and all the additional interesting links that we were mentioning throughout the call. And yeah, see you all online. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for
All right.
having us.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
And the outro is done. So from here on, we're still on YouTube as one last thank you, and but the content will be already edited out. And so please feel free to add the notes into our doc. So anything you mentioned and you want others to be able to access, to be finding there. And
right.
yeah, have a great rest of your day/night. Really enjoyed catching up with both of you.
All right.
Same
Thanks
here.
for having us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye. Bye, Sam.